The aesthetic or the beautiful experience is had whenever being is contemplated with delight. And its range extends from the delightful contemplation of the least being to the joyful contemplation of the supreme being. So, I mean, we can find joy and delight, we can find beauty in the least of all the beings. So say a rock. You know, we can see beauty in a rock. And then that leads us to more complex experiences of beauty in God's creation, which would be a plant, an organism, an animal, and then ultimately that leads us to humanity. Humanity leads us to the angels. Angels lead us to God. And so the supreme being is the ultimate object of beauty. And so we have that progression from one to the other. And that's all part of the experience of beauty. And so it really harkens us to try to do what we can to look at beauty in a more holistic way, you know. And I suspect if you're like me, we don't take advantage of the opportunities to experience beauty enough in our lives, you know. And so this progression from the simplest of God's creation to God himself is something that encourages us to once again take a look at the beauty that's around us, the beauty that's in us, the beauty that comes from God, because God is a creator. And so this aesthetic experience, this beautiful experience, is good because to love with a love that conforms to order is good, and by the very fact it is also beautiful, for whatever is in order is beautiful. And so we owe a lot to Augustine and Thomas's definitions of beauty in math. And so they were a big influence for them, in addition to some of the Greek philosophers, was Pythagoras, a mathematician. And so when you look at the dynamics of what beauty is for both Augustine and Thomas, you're going to experience a lot of mathematical kind of formulas that influence and inform what beauty is for them and how we experience it. And so he goes on to talk about the Beatific Vision, which is perfect joy in the contemplation of the supreme object, God, listed as it is above the whole created order. And that's the aesthetic experience par excellence, and the perfect archetype of all the aesthetic experiences achieved in this life. So in other words, the Beatific Vision is union with God in heaven. And so when we see God as God is, then we are seeing God perfectly, and when we see God perfectly, we are united with him in heaven. And so the Beatific Vision is easily defined as our experience of heaven, our union with God. And so when you look to something like purgatory, for example, purgatory is there to kind of cure or purge our cloudy vision. We're not able to see God in God's fullness because of the effects of sin. And so it's not enough sin to condemn us to hell, but it's enough sin that we don't see God perfectly. And so because of that, purgatory gives us that opportunity to purge or to clear the vision that is cloudy because of sin or the effects of sin. And therefore, once that is cleared, then we can see God in God's fullness. Now I use that tree because, as I've said before, my experience, one of the most powerful experiences that I've had of God and God's fullness is standing at the base of a sequoia tree. That's a sequoia tree in California. And so it's one of those experiences when you look at a sequoia tree that you can't help but, at least I can't help but experience God because of the immensity of that creation. And a sequoia tree, I mean, the oldest sequoia tree is over 5,000 years old. And so that tree was here 3,000 years before Jesus was here. And so that's an incredible thing to contemplate. I mean, that something could be alive for that long. And that thing predates Jesus by a long shot. And so it's one of those things that really connects me to God. Now I suspect or hope that you all have things like that in beauty that really connects you to the Lord. And so Augustine will connect beauty with form, and he held that the body is so much the more a body in the degree that it is beautiful, and so much less the body in the degree that it is ugly. So ugliness is the absence of the form a thing should have. So everything has a form. So we as human beings have a form. Our form is we have 2 arms, 2 legs, a head, a neck, a torso, and all the things that make up our body. That's our form, okay? And so to the degree that we live in union with that form, we are beautiful. To the degree that we don't live to that form, we are considered ugly. Now, when you talk about ugly and beauty in both Aquinas and Thomas, you have to try to move away from that subjective value. Ugly is not meant to be a derogatory term in either one of them. Ugliness just means that that creature is not living to its fullest potential for whatever reason. So if a dog has 3 legs instead of 4, that dog is considered less beautiful or more ugly because it's not living in its true form, which is 4 legs. Now that doesn't mean that creature is valued less in the eyes of God or in the eyes of humanity. It just means that it's not living out to its complete form or to its potential form. And so to the degree that we're able to do that, then we are more beautiful and less ugly, if you will. And so, does that make sense to everybody? Okay.
I'm a little insulted by that.
Try not to be. So, I have poor eyesight. If I take off my glasses, I can't see Father Matt back there. So, from that definition, I would be uglier because I don't have perfect vision. But, again, it's not a value judgment. It's just, and Augustine will also say that creatures always have beauty because they are made by the Creator. And so there may be less beauty in terms of their lack of form or their lack of unity, which I'll talk about in a second, but they're still beautiful. Did you have a question?
Yeah, I'm trying to get the context of this. Is the belief or the philosophy that you're beautiful if you are living up to your expected form, the perfect form, like you say, 2 arms, 2 legs, or are you beautiful if you're living up to the potential that you have the capability of with the form that you actually have?
Well, ultimately, the closer you are to God, the more beautiful you are. So human beings would be more beautiful than a plant because God made us with intelligence. God made us more in His image than a plant. And so we have the more we're closer to God, the more beautiful we are in our form. In terms of, I'm not quite understanding the difference.
If someone has an accident that has dismembered one of their arms, the statement that you made earlier makes it suggest like that person is less beautiful than one who has both arms.
Correct.
Although that person may be living up to the fullest potential and the fullest beauty and the fullest closeness to God that they are able to with the form that they have at that time.
Correct. That's my understanding. But that doesn't mean
equivalently beautiful if they are living up to their maximum potential, according to that philosophy.
Correct. So you only can do what you can do. So if you're born, for example, you're born with 1 arm instead of 2, you would be uglier, again, not using it as a value judgment. You're uglier than the person with 2 arms because you don't have 2 arms. We're made in unity. And so you don't have 2 arms, so you're more ugly than the person who has 2. But to the degree that you're living within the confines of the way you are created or the situation that life presents you in, you're beautiful. So again, it's really hard because my inclination is to want to see ugly and beauty in terms of subjective values. So when you hear ugly, it's a very negative connotation, It is. But not in Augustine and Thomas. So they're trying to look at it objectively. We have, several centuries of additional layers to those 2 words, whereas they didn't. And so they're looking at it rather objectively in terms of our movement towards unity and our movement towards form. And so the more united we are, and again, that's part of the Pythagorean influence, is that unity is seen as a value in beauty. So the more unified something is, I'm jumping ahead of myself, but the more unified something is, the more perfect it is, and therefore the more beautiful it is. And so, is that making sense?
I think I know where you're going with this, but
Okay, Kath?
Well, I was just going to follow up on that because Augustine's working out of Plato's philosophical system, and so he would indeed think that someone who did not have an arm was uglier than someone who did, because his whole philosophical system is built on the ideals of the forms, and the form who have two arms. So that in Augustine's understanding of Plato, that would indeed be how
Right.
he understands it.
Right.
Now, you can disagree with Augustine.
Of course.
Plenty of people have done.
Right. But, yeah, thank you. And so,
Wouldn't it be better just to use a word like symmetry instead of ugly and beautiful?
well, symmetry is part of it.
Well, symmetry is a lot of it.
Yeah,
Because you don't have beauty unless you have symmetry.
correct.
So instead of saying ugly, you should say less symmetrical.
Less symmetrical? Sure, I mean, we can do that. I'm using the language that he used.
Oh, really?
But yeah, Father Matt?
Yeah, I think that was right on. You know, really, the problem is it's participation of beauty. So the degree by which you participate in the form of truth, which is a very Platonic idea.
Mm-hmm.
So it's the closer you get to that form, the more you participate in it.
Correct.
So it's degrees of participation.
Right.
And it's so insulting to the modern ear, but it's I mean, this is actually history. This is how they actually taught. They weren't above the entire. This is just
Right. Right. So, yeah, thank you. Well, remember, I think the first time we were together, I talked about that old ad in the 70s that was on billboards where it said, God made me and God doesn't make junk. And so, I mean, we live by that credo, so to speak, that we are beautiful because we are made in the image and likeness of God, whether it's symmetrical or not. But in terms of the ideal, this is what Augustine is talking about, in terms of the ideal form of beauty. Yes?
Even how no one is perfect, we're all ugly to some degree, and beauty is something we should strive for. I mean, none of us are perfect.
But I think I'd probably put a more positive spin on it than that, George. So, I mean, we start off beautiful, and to the degree that we're not symmetrical, unified, and harmonious, then we kind of become less beautiful, if you will. So, okay?